My project first started in April when I purchased a slab of black walnut from a great guy that I met on Facebook Marketplace in Butler, PA. Here I am picking it up at his house. These are some initial photos of the wood before I did any work on it. As you can see, there is a rotted void in the middle, which I felt had great potential to be a table after filling it with epoxy. The first problem I had to address was a slight wobble that existed at the base of the slab. To fix it, I began installing a bow tie patch made out of some cherry hardwood. This will prevent the crack from going any further and splitting the wood into two pieces. I am now tracing the outline of the bow tie with my chisel, and I will come through with a Dremel and a drill to make some plunge cuts in the previously traced out area. This took some time, but with patience I was able to clear out all the wood so that the bow tie can snugly fit in the area with some wood glue. It wasn't perfect, but it served its purpose and stabilized the slab completely. Here is a little footage of the sanding process where I'm going through first with a wire brush to clear out any debris in the void because I don't want any of it to get into the epoxy when I pour it. I then come through with a planer to get rid of the saw marks from when the slab was initially cut and before it was kiln dried. The sander then was used to get rid of the marks from the planer. I ended up sanding up to about 320 grit, I believe. I then come through with a chisel to remove some of the bark from the side, and then just using my hand piece of sandpaper to smoothen it out a bit. Now I'm ready for the epoxy, and again I'm clearing out as much debris as possible with a wire brush and vacuum, and getting my supplies ready for the pour. This crucial part is sealing the bottom of the void so that no epoxy would leak out when I pour it. I'm using some wrestling mat tape, which has very strong adhesive and is flexible, and I'm also coming through with some 5-minute epoxy to seal up the overlapped tape edges as much as possible. Now I'm using some of the sample epoxy pieces that we made before with different colors to try and mix the color that we want. We were going for a deep ocean blue with some metallic gray mixed in as well. The mixing process was a unique first-time experience, and with some trial and error, we were able to find the right color. I ended up pouring about 3 buckets worth of epoxy into the void, and I poured to a depth of about 1.5 inches in deep. One of the benefits of this product, which is Epoxy's Flowcast, is that it has a very long working time. This means that I can pour 3 buckets worth and get rid of all the air bubbles without having to worry about it drying too quickly on me. And with a chopstick, I'm able to create a little texture and swirl in the epoxy to give it some character. Here's an initial photo of the first pour. Unfortunately, the extensive process of sealing the bottom of the void was clearly not extensive enough, as we did have a sizable leak. It found some crevice somewhere and adhered to the bottom of my workbench. However, after a lot of work and prying, we were able to lift the table from my workbench, and here's a picture of how sticky this epoxy was. It truly was a mess to deal with, but we ended up fixing it anyway. Here's a quick photo of me scuffing up the first layer with 220 grit sandpaper in preparation for the next layer, which I decided to make clear. I saw a YouTube video of a guy who made the bottom layer a dark blue and the top layer was a clear coat, and I liked how that looked, so I gave it a try. So I'm mixing up the clear epoxy and preparing for the next pour. It came out with a lot of bubbles that looked white and kind of gray. But again, this product is great because with a heat gun and some time, all the bubbles will eventually rise up. And here I am with the heat gun, getting rid of some of those bubbles. I'm also coming around with a chopstick to really scrape the edges and make sure that there are no trapped bubbles on the inner parts of the void that I would be able to see once that clear layer dried. And over time, the bubbles went away and we were able to see deep into the epoxy, and I really liked how it ended up looking. It was a great mix between the almost rotted pieces of wood in the middle of the void and those deep blue colors, which really mix well. I was also excited during this pour because the epoxy leaked out onto the hardwood surface, and the grain of the wood really began to pop, and the deep brown reddish color looked amazing as it contrasted with the blue and clear epoxy in the middle. After some days of waiting for the epoxy to cure, I am taking the planer and removing excess material from the bottom layer, which had originally adhered to the top of my workbench. I'm coming through with the sander to get rid of the planing marks as well. I repeated this process on the top surface, just trying to make it relatively level on both sides. Here is a picture of the top with a thin coat of epoxy on it, so you can see how the inner void blends in with the outer wood surface. However, after sanding the bottom layer, we ended up really liking the more vibrant blue colors that emerged. So we ended up deciding to use that as the top of the table instead. I'm using Famo Wood's glaze coat to put a top layer of finish on the wood, and it just is so beautiful. It really brings out all those rich colors of the wood and the grain and the character of the wood as it contrasts with the really pretty blue color from the epoxy. In retrospect, I probably should have poured a small seal coat on top first because, as you can see, at the bottom of the wood there is an area of air bubbles that continuously kept emerging. And unfortunately, in my attempt to remove these air bubbles, I ended up overheating that area with the heat gun, and the bubbles ended up hardening inside the finished coat. I was a bit frustrated, but with a sander, I was able to sand it out, no problem. Now I'm pouring my next layer of the glaze coat, and good as new. This product has a quicker drying time, so I have to be a little faster with the application, and I'm using the heat gun to make sure there are no air bubbles in the finish, but I'm being especially careful not to repeat my first mistake. We ended up taking apart an old coffee table of ours and welding the legs of it to a piece of steel, and then screwed the new leg assembly to the bottom of the wood with a couple of 1-inch lag bolts. I'm really happy how it came out, and I learned so much through the whole process. Huge thanks to Bill for selling us this great piece of wood, to Mr. Tom for letting me borrow all of his tools, my dad for pushing me to finally finish it, and the countless videos on YouTube for showing me how to go about a project of this caliber. Thanks so much. Hope you enjoyed.